part 2 of the sourdough era challenge. Each week for the next 6 weeks, I am going through and we're talking about a different topic each time revolving around sourdough. So last week, if you missed it, we talked about making and caring for a sourdough starter. And then this week, we are talking about making a loaf of artisan sourdough bread. So that's what we're going to be covering today. I'm going to give people just a minute to join and make sure I'm set up, but let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments, and we will get started here in just 1 second. Glad people can join. I feel bad that it's kind of in the middle of the day, so I know a lot of people are working or busy with other things, but I feel like this is just the best time when my kids are at school and it's quiet at my house. But if you're just joining in, we're going to be making a loaf of sourdough bread together. And I'm going to be answering some questions, talking through troubleshooting as well. So it hopefully will be very helpful for you guys. And I'm just pulling up my notes over here. And I think we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So with making a loaf of sourdough bread, there's a couple, let's talk ingredients real quick. What do you need? So the first thing is you need a active sourdough starter. So if you haven't made a sourdough starter yet, you can go back to last week's live and we talked a lot about making and caring for a sourdough starter, and you can start from there. But one of the most important things with making sourdough bread is making sure that you have a strong and active sourdough starter. The other ingredients you just need water, you need salt, and you need bread flour. And I get a lot of questions, do I have to use bread flour? Can I use all-purpose flour? And you can use all-purpose flour. The biggest thing between all-purpose and bread flour is that bread flour has a higher protein content. So it is able to absorb the moisture, absorb all the water better from your dough, versus like all-purpose flour isn't able to absorb it as well. So if you're going to use all-purpose flour, I recommend reducing the amount of water that's actually going into your loaf. But if you can, highly recommend bread flour. There's lots of good brands out there. I use a lot of King Arthur. I can get King Arthur in bigger bags at Costco. So that's what I get. Okay, so now that we have our ingredient list, let's just start by making a loaf. So I have my sourdough starter. What happened this morning is I made a loaf, but my scale was sitting on something, and so it wasn't accurately reading it. So as soon as I started mixing it, I knew something was very wrong, and I added double the amount of flour. So I made a different loaf, but anyways, I ended up having less sourdough starter. So my starter isn't quite ready yet, so just know I'm going to show you a starter when I'm making a loaf that isn't supposed to be used yet, but we're just going to roll with it today so I can at least demonstrate. Okay, so here's my sourdough starter right now. So the things that you're looking for when you're making a when you're making a loaf of bread, you want your starter to be doubled or more in size. So sometimes depending on how big of a feeding it gets, it might actually more than double in size. But you're looking for when the starter stops growing. And then it's going to be like domed at the top, and then it's going to start flattening out. And that's the time that you want to use it. That's at the peak, when it starts just to start flattening out. You want to see a lot more bubbles. So see how mine is still, it's hard to see that it's domed from the side, but it's pretty domed on top, and there's not a ton of bubbles. I mean, the more I move it around, there's a few bubbles that are popping. That tells me that this starter is not done rising yet. So ideally, if I wasn't going live with you guys, I would not use my starter yet. I would let it sit for longer until it is nice and bubbly on the top. It'll be nice and bubbly on the sides. And like I said, it will start to flatten out. After it flattens out, it will start falling back down. Ideally, you want to catch it before it starts to fall back down. If it just barely starts falling, that's okay, you can still use it. Or let's say you caught it at its peak, but you aren't ready to make bread with it. You can just throw it into the fridge and use it later that day or whenever you're ready to use it. I recommend within a 24-hour period, and if it's going to be longer than that, probably refeed your starter. But that's what I recommend there. So I'm going to grab my scale here. So one thing you want to have with sourdough, highly, highly, highly recommend, is getting a scale. And I actually would not recommend this one. I have a different one. Like, I honestly like the cheaper ones better. This one is like disconnected from it, which is nice. So if I have something bigger on it, I can still see, but it's honestly a pain. It turns off so quickly. I feel like I'm always having to turn it on, and having to turn on 2 power buttons is annoying to me. But I do send email recaps after these lives. So make sure you're on my email list. If you're not sure how to get on it, you can check out like a few posts back. There's several of them I have on there about this sourdough era challenge. And you can hop on my email list from that. And if you can't find it, you can DM me as well. But afterwards, in that email, I send a big recap with a lot of information, bonus tips and tricks, links to everything that I talk about today in the live, as well as the recipes. So the recipe that we're using today is my same-day sourdough bread recipe that is on my blog. Okay, so we start out with 350 grams of water. This is just tap water. Room temperature or a little bit warmer, like if your house is cold. If your house is running really hot, let's say, like it was the dead of summer, your house is like 90 degrees, you'd probably want to use cooler water. So we're going to do 350 grams of water. And then we're going to do 150 grams of active sourdough starter. And like we talked about, ideally it's going to be at its peak. This is not. But we're rolling with it. Okay. So your starter will be fairly thick when you use it. It won't be quite as thick as this. It does thin out just a little bit. Okay, we need 500, or to get to 500. So 150 grams of sourdough starter. I didn't bring a spatula. Here's a fork. Okay, scoop the rest in. Okay, so now I have my starter in, and I'm just gonna give this a mix. And really quick, on my sourdough starter, now that I have used it for my loaf, I recommend, what I do is I'll refeed this, and then I put this into my fridge, and it can stay there for a week, 10 days or so, until I'm ready to use it again. I'll probably keep mine on my counter just because I've been baking almost every day as I'm trying to get some fall recipes out for you guys. So I will keep mine on the counter, but if you weren't going to use it for a little while, then you could do that. Can you guys, someone let me know, can you guys see this okay, or are all the comments blocking it? I'm wondering if I should move it up a little bit. You can see here, see how my starter is like floating to the top as well? That's another good sign that it's airy. A lot of people rely solely on using the float test. Sorry, lost my train of thought. The float test to make sure that their starter is floating on water. I don't find it 100% reliable, but it is always a nice sign to say like, okay, it is floating. It's good. Okay, glad you guys can see it okay. All right, once it's a milky substance, I put it back on my scale, and now I'm gonna add the remainder of my ingredients. So I just like to clear my scale in between each, and now I'm gonna add my salt in. And I do 10 grams of salt. I just get this huge thing of pink salt from Costco. I really don't know why I use pink salt. I don't know. So don't ask. I just do. Maybe I just like the pink color. I don't know. It seems healthier. I know that's ridiculous and not actually based on anything. Okay, there's my 10 grams of salt. And then I'm gonna add in 500 grams of flour. Oh, and I totally forgot to mention something. I am using a straight edge container. If I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to use a straight edge container. I actually like to use round ones, but for some reason I couldn't find my second round one, so I'll show you my other one that has dough in it. So usually I like to use these round containers. Just because these have a little bit more like nooks and crannies, you know? So it's a little bit easier with... Oh, shoot. There's a bunch of water on my table, and it's now covering the bottom of my bread flour bag, so that's great. Have to do something about that. Okay, now I'm adding my 500 grams of bread flour. Usually I go a little over, just scoop some back in. Okay. Another thing, I feel like a lot of people get really stressed out, like it has to be exact to the gram. If you're like within a couple grams, do not stress about it. Okay, while I'm mixing this, I do see a question about fresh milled flours. So I recently got a mill. I got it over summer. I did not have time to test it out over summer. We were traveling a lot and just really busy. My kids were home every day. It just never happened. But I am super excited because now that my kids are back in school and things are calming down a little bit, I am going to start testing out some freshly milled flours. So currently I have not had a lot of experience with fresh milled sourdough, but hopefully by the end of this year, I will be able to give you guys some tips on that, and I'll kind of take you along with me on that in stories. Okay, now I'm just mixing this up. I want to make sure all of my flour is incorporated, and I'm using a dough whisk. I get mine from Barlow & Co. I have a 10% off with them. I think my code's Country Road Sourdough. But I like to use that, and then towards the end I end up using my hands to like finish mixing. But we just want to get all of the flour fully incorporated. So something I used to believe when I first started making sourdough is that you didn't want to like touch the dough too much. Like, I don't know, I felt like something would happen if I touched this too much. And like, it's true that you don't want to, we're not kneading this dough for long periods of time or anything. I have to wear gloves because I have really bad skin allergies and eczema, and if I don't wear gloves, I will be up all night itching my hands. I think I have an allergy to dough. Okay, and I'm gonna mist them. Usually I would just run them underwater, but since we're over here. Okay, get them a little damp. Getting your hands damp when you're working with dough can help it not be, not stick to your hands or your gloves or whatever you're using as much. Okay, but back to the myth. I believe that, you know, you didn't want to touch this dough very much, which is true. This isn't a dough you're like kneading, but it's not going to hurt it by doing like a good mixing at the beginning. So I like to really get everything incorporated and make sure that all of my flour is incorporated, because if I don't, then I will have chunks of flour later on. So we're just giving this a good mix. Sorry if this is shaking the video a little bit. Okay, and if anyone missed earlier, this is my same-day sourdough bread recipe on my blog. If you just go to countryroadsourdough.com, you can search same-day sourdough bread, and it will pop right up. But you can also join my email list, and I will be sending out a recap tomorrow with everything that we talked about today. Well, maybe I'll even send it out later today. I just don't like to send too many emails out because I think I already sent one out today, so I don't want to be spammy. Thanks for ordering my cookbook. I do have a brand new cookbook out. It just launched. It's called Same Day Sourdough. It has the same day sourdough bread recipe in it. 60 recipes, and all of them can be made in one day, which is really awesome. You can find that at shop.countryroadsourdough.com. You can check out my website too. Okay, I think we're just about there. Just trying to make sure. There's always the bottom. It's always like this. Okay, and I want to say I get messages daily about my sourdough is so sticky. Do you guys see this right now? It is supposed to be sticky. Okay, if it is like the dough that you're used to kneading, it's not right. It needs to be a wetter dough. I mean, obviously you can go with lower hydration sourdoughs, but I am talking specifically for this recipe. It is going to be wet and sticky. And honestly, with sourdough, it's just something that you have to get used to. I feel like a lot of people are not used to sourdough bread dough in general, and so they think that they have done something wrong. But as you can see here, it is very sticky and gloopy. It comes together, I promise, through stretch and folds. It becomes a completely different dough. Okay, take my gloves off here for a second. All right, any questions on this first initial mix? I'll give you guys a second in here. But my biggest tip, get some straight edge containers. I promise you, it is going to make your life so much easier to do this. And that's actually why I'm going to be updating. I have an online sourdough class, and I used to teach it in just regular kitchen bowls, which you could totally do that if you really, really want to. But I feel like for so long, I was lying to myself by saying, I totally can see when my dough has grown 50% in a mixing bowl. And honestly, that's just like crazy, because that is extremely hard to visualize. I feel like it's a little bit easier if you're working with other doughs where it's like, just let the dough double in size. But if you let this dough completely double in size, it is going to overproof. So for me, I finally was like, you know what? I'm going to try some straight edge containers. Game changer. Way more consistency in my loaves. I can't speak highly enough about getting straight edge containers. Preferably the round ones, not these ones. But that is why I'm going to be redoing my course. Well, updating it. A lot of the information stays the same. So if you do have my class, just know that I will be coming out with an update, and everybody that already had access to my class will get that update as well. But it really, really, really makes a difference. So that is my number one recommendation when making sourdough bread, straight edge containers. Okay, let's keep going. I haven't seen any questions on this first section, so I think we will just keep moving forward. Yeah, okay, I think we're good. Oh. Are these containers listed on your Amazon store? They should be. I should have a round one on there. It's hard because the round ones, I feel like whenever I link one, they end up going out of stock. And so it's hard to keep it up to date, but after this live, I will go into my Amazon storefront and make sure I have it linked in there, just in case you do not see one. And I'll also link one in my email afterwards. Okay, so now that we have our dough, what do we do with it? We are going to first cover it. And these kinds of containers oftentimes will come with lids, so you could use the lid on it. I always just use, these are from Wild Clementine. I don't have any affiliate link or anything to them, But I do love them. I have ordered these with my own money, and she's a small business, and I do love supporting small businesses. What I like about these is that they are lined so that they're easy to wash after you use them. But this is typically what I use to cover all of my doughs. Side note, she also has 9x13 pan ones, and I love it so much. So that's a shout out to Wild Clementine. Okay, so now that we have our bread dough, what we want to do is we want to put it, ideally we want it at about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So I use I'm a little scared to show you guys over here because it's kind of a mess, but my Broad & Taylor proofing box, sorry, my phone stand's a little squeaky. I like to use my Broad & Taylor proofing box to put my bread doughs in, and I just set my temperature to 75 and we're good. I like that it keeps the dough a consistent temperature. You could also use a dough mat. I talked about that last week in my live, and I can link them again in the email. But other things that you could try, some people have success with using their oven with the light on. I just have one piece of advice with that. Just be really careful and keep an eye on what the temperature actually is in that oven, because sometimes in that oven light, I've seen temperatures in the hundreds, and over 100 degrees is a little bit too warm for your sourdough. You could also try just wrapping it in a blanket. If you have quartz counters, those are oftentimes cooler, so I will sometimes just wrap it up in a towel so it's not actually touching that quartz counter. You could also put it above your fridge. That tends to be a little bit warmer up there. There's lots of little tips and tricks if you're not wanting to actually purchase anything, but ideally you want to keep your dough temperature at about 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and if you're within a few, it's fine. I feel like I am very kind of middle of the road, where I'm not just forget all the rules, but I'm also not super strict on the rules. If you're within a range, usually it'll be fine. Okay, so I'm gonna leave my dough temperature in a warm spot, and then I'm gonna let it sit for 30 minutes. Roughly. Okay, again, this is where the loose rules come in. I like to tell you guys this because sometimes I feel like if it's too rigid, people are they back up a little bit, right? You're oh my gosh, this is way overwhelming. I have to start setting a timer, and every 30 minutes I have to drop everything I'm doing to do this thing. Okay, I make this while I'm outside with my kids, and then I'm oh shoot, it's been an hour. I should probably go in and do a stretch and fold. So just know that I'm telling you what you should do, but there's also flexibility in it. So don't panic. Okay, so we're going to do a set of stretch and folds. I'll give this dough a few minutes to rest, and then I will show you what a stretch and fold looks like. So we'll kind of come back to that. But you want to do about 3 sets of stretch and folds with roughly 30 minutes in between each. It doesn't have to be exactly 30 minutes. Nothing happens if it's 40 minutes or an hour or whatever. The reason that we want to give it about 30 minutes in between each set is because we want to give the dough time to relax. So after it stretch and folds, it kind of tightens up and then it relaxes, and then it tightens up and then it relaxes. So it's kind of wow, I just totally lost my train of thought. I do not know where I was going with that sentence. Okay, we'll just keep going. Sorry, you just get me. This is me. Okay. So once your sets of stretch and folds are done, I know where I was going. You do stretch and folds in place of kneading in other recipes. So bread doughs that have a lower hydration, oftentimes you just knead that dough. So you knead it for a period of time, and then you let that dough just rise. The reason that we're not kneading this dough is because you probably saw when I was mixing it, it was very wet, and there's no way you could knead this dough, okay? There's nothing to knead right now. It needs time to develop, to strengthen, so that's why we're using the stretch and folds in place of kneading. It's a more hands-off approach to strengthen our dough. And I have tested. Can I do less stretch and folds and get away with it? You can. Okay, sometimes I've only done 1 set of stretch and folds. I still get good bread. It's not my best loaf. I have found, like, I've done like comparisons of just doing one stretch and fold versus doing all 3 sets, and the loaf that I only do 1 set on doesn't seem to rise as much. It's a little bit flatter of a loaf, not quite as like nice and airy on the inside after I bake it. So I do think it is very beneficial to do those stretch and folds. Really helps strengthen the dough. It's going to help you in the end. But like I said, if life gets in the way, you don't get to all of them, don't panic. Okay, you haven't ruined your dough just over that. Okay, like I said, I'll come back to doing the set of stretch and folds so you guys can see it. So then let's talk about bulk fermentation. So after you do your 3 sets of stretch and folds, if you're keeping your dough at 75 degrees Fahrenheit, typically from the time you mix your dough to when it's ready to go, usually about 4.5 hours, sometimes 5 hours, like this dough, because I was early on my sourdough starter, it's probably going to take my dough a little bit longer to get going because it wasn't fully at peak. There's a lot of variables that can play into like that timing, but the things to kind of keep in mind, well, the biggest thing is temperature. If you're keeping your dough like at a cooler temperature, it's going to take longer for it to rise. And if it's at a warmer temperature, it's going to take less time to rise. So that's something to keep in mind too. So if your dough is going to be at a cooler temperature, it's probably going to take longer for it through that first rise. But in general, if you're at 75 degrees, it's about 4.5 hours from the time it's mixed to the time it is ready to shape. Okay, so I'm going to pull out this other dough I have going. Let's see how it's looking. Yeah, seems about there. Okay, I want to show you a little trick I do. I'm gonna bring this down a little bit. Okay, so on here, if you can see, I have a mark here. That is about where my dough was when I first started. So what I like to do to give me a rough estimate on about 50% is I will take my little measuring stick here. I'm not saying this is exact. This is just giving you a rough idea, okay? I take it here and I'm like, okay, it's at 1.5. So then I just say 1.5 times 1.5. So that will give the extra 50% of how much I want to rise. That gets me to 2.25. So I'll just measure that in here and I'll make a little mark, and then I keep an eye on it, and once it hits that spot, once it hits that spot, then I know, okay, it's risen about 50%. Sometimes I let it go, a little bit further. Just depends on like what I'm doing, what's happening in life. If I can get it from here to even like the top of this mark here, or sometimes it even reaches the top of here before I get to it. As long as I get it kind of in this range here, I usually have a good loaf of bread at the end. Okay. So, other signs that you can look at besides, sorry, I just realized I wasn't at the bottom. Just making sure I'm staying ahead of questions. Other signs that I can look at that this dough is ready. So you'll see it has some bubble activity on the sides. Again, it has that growth. And this is why I say a straight edge container is just such a big game changer. Because let's be honest, if we were trying to do this in a mixing bowl that looks like this, you would have no idea when you actually hit 50%. Just be honest with yourself. We wouldn't actually know. Okay, it also has a nice jiggly top. I feel like lighting makes it a little bit hard, but you can see it's pretty jiggly here. And now I've messed up my dough by tilting it. But you'll also notice on your dough, it will kind of have like a dome shape. Like it'll be pulling away from the sides of the bowl. Another good sign that is ready to go. So those are the signs that I look for when I know my dough is ready to go. And I'll also be like smoothing out on top. And look, see, this is the same dough as that other one. It's not even sticking to my fingers on top. Okay, now as I start touching it, it will stick a little bit, but it shouldn't be overly sticky. Okay, so let's talk really quickly before I shape this about underproofing versus overproofing. And I would say, well, okay, let me talk about, there's three main problems that are pretty much always, it's always one of these three things when you have an issue with your sourdough bread in the end. So the number one reason is you don't have a strong enough starter. So let's say your starter is not consistently doubling in size. Maybe it smells really acidic-y. Those are the biggest ones. If you're not seeing it double with each feeding, or it seems like it takes forever to double in size, it probably needs to be strengthened before you start making a loaf of sourdough bread, because your sourdough bread is only as good as your sourdough starter. So highly recommend making sure that your sourdough starter is in a good place before making a loaf of bread. That's going to set you up for success. The second problem that I see frequently, and it's probably the most frequent one that I see, is underproofing. People are so scared of overproofing their dough that they just end up not letting it rise that much and just moving forward, and then when it bakes, it's just not what they expected it to be. So underproofing is when you don't let it sit for long enough, so it didn't have enough time to rise. So if you're, especially as we go into winter, a lot of people have this problem in winter because their dough is cooling off, and so they are using the same timing as in the summer when their house is a completely different temperature. So sometimes we have to account, like if we don't have something that can keep the temperature consistent, like these proofing boxes or something, then we need to give our dough longer to rise. That is why, seeing how much it's grown, you see why it's so important. These straight edge containers are so awesome. I just saw that there was a question here. Okay, I'll come back to sourdough starter. Anyway, so that is a common thing that I see is underproofing. So what does underproofing look like? And I will include some example pictures in the email. So again, just another plug for my email. Hop on there so you get this recap email. But with underproofed bread, oftentimes things that you might see, like I get a lot of people asking, like, why is my crust so tough? Like it's really thick and tough. That is often a sign of underproofing. If your loaf is triangular shaped, so it kind of looks like a triangle on top, again, another sign of underproofing. If you have really big holes at the top of your loaf and then towards the bottom it's like pretty dense, another sign of underproofing. If you see like a shiny pale crust, that sometimes the underproofing and overproofing can look similar, so it can get a little bit tricky, but the pale shiny crust can be a sign of underproofing as well. I'm trying to think of other things, like if it's really dense, almost looks like a kitchen sponge, that is typically underproofing, so you need to extend your proofing time. Okay? And then the third thing that I see is overproofing, and that is when you let your dough sit for too long. Overproofed dough oftentimes will be very sticky and unmanageable. I always am hesitant though to say it's sticky because sourdough in general is just a stickier dough. So make sure you have an expectation that this is going to be stickier. But if it is like very unmanageable, that is when you know it can be a sign of going over. So as far as like when your bread is baked, oftentimes, like if your loaf, let's say even before you're baking, when you go to score your bread, if it kind of like just bloop, like collapses out, that could be a sign of overproofing because the gluten strands have started to deteriorate, so your loaf isn't as strong anymore. If when you bake your loaf, it is really just like flat, that could be a sign of overproofing. Oftentimes what will happen is like your loaf kind of collapses on itself. So your loaf might be, it's hard to describe, but it's like airy but dense, if that makes sense, because it collapsed on itself. It should be like, if you looked at the inside of your loaf, it should be like completely open. Like you shouldn't really see spots that like don't really have holes. Like you'll probably see holes all throughout, and like if you push on it, like it will feel airy, but it will be denser because it has collapsed on itself, if that makes sense. Like I said, I'll show example pictures, but I just realized I need to grab another pair of gloves because these are dirty. So let me get a pair of gloves and then I'll show you how I shape this dough. Okay, all right, so I got my gloves and we are going to shape this dough, and I'm going to do it into a oval. So I'm gonna get my proofing box ready here, or my proofing basket. If you do not have a proofing basket, you can use an 8 to 10 inch bowl, and then just line it with a tea towel or something. That will work, but I do like my wood bannettons. Okay. And something I like to do with my baskets, once they're lined, you can put it straight onto the basket, but it just keeps them cleaner if you use the liner inside. I'm going to take rice flour. This is what this looks like. And this is what I use to keep my dough from sticking to this. You can also you can just take rice and you can blend up the rice and you have rice flour. Just saw I missed. What was the name of the lady that sells the covers? It's Wild Clementine Co. Okay, so anyways, the rice flour, it doesn't have gluten in it, and so your dough doesn't stick to it like it would stick to the all-purpose flour, which is why I like rice flour for that purpose, but you could also use your all-purpose or bread flour in there, and it will be fine. Okay, got my bread dough, and I'm just gonna pull it away from the sides here. And then release it from the bowl. And I am just working on a non-floured surface. You don't need flour down. If you put flour down, it makes it harder to shape, in my opinion. Okay, comes out mostly clean. A tip for this, instead of just like putting this in your sink with water in it, I honestly like to just let this dry out, and then once it's dried out, I can just like bang the side into the garbage can, get all of the scraps thrown away, and then I wash it. Okay, so here's my bread dough, and I didn't bring, usually I like to use those metal scrapers, but I don't have one over here. I don't want to go get one. Okay, so I am going to bring this out into, oh, sorry, my thing is shaking. Bring this down a little bit more. Okay. Oh, also, I'm going to get my hands a little damp. Again, this just helps with your dough from sticking. Okay, so what I like to do is take my top and I pull it and then I bring it on top of itself. And I'm like gently pulling to create tension on the outer surface That just helps get a nice crispy crust. Then I'm gonna go from the sides and I'm gonna give it a hug. Give it a hug. And see, like my dough really isn't, like it sticks a little bit to the table, but it's really not too bad. Okay, and then I'm gonna take my bottom, give it a hug. Okay, and here's where I would change things up depending on if I was going to use a round or an oval. So if I was doing a round, I would just do one quick flip and then use my hands in cupping shape and rotate it to get into a round. But since I'm going to do an oval, what I do instead is I just roll this up. And this is why you want to use quick movements because it is a little bit sticky. But it shouldn't be like unbearably sticky. Okay, now that I have it rolled up, I'm going to just seal the sides together. So I just kind of pinch that, both sides. And see how it's not like super, well, you might not be able to see. See how it's not like super smooth right on that top? So what I'm going to do is take my hands and just bring them under here. And I'm just going to pull to help smooth out the top. And see how that's smoothing out? And then I just kind of like tuck my sides in, get them where I want. You can do a pre-shape, like, you know, sometimes I will shape this, let it sit for 30 minutes, and then shape again. But, you know, the more I do this, the lazier I get. And so now I just do one shaping, and it's fine. Turns out great. Okay, now I'm going to take my bread dough, and I'm going to turn it upside down into my basket. Okay, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about stitching, but we have to let this dough relax first, so I'll come back to that. But this is what my dough looks like. Nice and bouncy in here. I will usually put another wild clementine cover on here, and then we let it finish the second rise. Okay, bring this back up now. Oh shit. Where was I? Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now that I have my dough in here, I have two options for my second rise. I can either leave this on the counter for a same day option. And to do that, I would just cover it and I would leave it at the 75-degree temperature. And usually, depending on what your temperature is, this can take 1 to 3 hours. I feel like kind of like that 1.5, 2 hours is usually roughly about when mine is ready. And to test when this dough is ready to be baked, what you'll do is you'll get a little bit of flour or rice flour on your hand, sprinkle it here, and then you're going to do what's called a poke test. I can demonstrate it now, but it's not going to since we just shaped this. But you would do this, and then you would poke your dough in. And what you're looking for is when, so like right now you can see, sorry, I'm trying to angle this well so you guys can see it. See how it like immediately springs back and it's like that dent disappears? That is a sign that it needs longer, which obviously it does because we just put it in here. If I poked it and it just like the dent stays, it does not spring back at all. That is a sign of overproofing. So when that happens, you just want to try and bake it as soon as possible. If it's gone like really, really over and it's not holding any shape, you could make it into focaccia if you wanted. Just put it in a 9x13 pan with some olive oil, dimple it out, 425 degrees Fahrenheit for like 30 minutes. You have focaccia. But we're trying to make sourdough bread, not focaccia right now. And when it's just right, what you'll do is you'll poke it and it will slowly spring back, and it probably won't even spring back all the way. It will leave like a little dent. That is when it's good, it's ready to bake. So when it is, when I'm doing my same day option, what I like to do is once it is like that poke test is good, I will start preheating my Dutch oven in the oven, 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and I will put my dough in the freezer. The reason that I freeze it while I'm waiting for my oven to preheat is cold dough is one, easier to score, And I feel like it just holds its shape just a little bit better. So I prefer if the dough is at least a little bit cold. So I like to pop mine in the freezer while I'm waiting for my oven to preheat. That's just my little trick there. I also find when your dough is cold, it blisters better. So your crust blisters, which is a good thing. You like having it's a good sign of fermentation. Okay. Let's see if I'm missing anything. Oh, the other option. The other option is to do an overnight refrigeration. So you could cover this dough and then put it into the fridge and let it sit in there for like 8 to 12 hours. After that 8 to 12 hour period, once your oven is preheated, just pull it out and you're just going to bake it straight from the fridge. Flip it onto your silicone cover or parchment paper, score your dough, and then bake it. So those are your two options there. You can either do same day or you can do overnight. I feel like the same day sourdough bread, you get a much milder flavor, versus if you let it sit in the fridge for a longer period of time, it gives it more time to develop flavor. So my personal favorite option is to do the overnight ferment whenever possible. So usually I will feed my starter in the morning, start my bread dough around 5-ish, put it into the fridge overnight, and then in the morning I will bake it. That just seems to be a good schedule for me. But I also like to do the same day option. Like, let's say if that morning I'm like, you know what, I want to make soup tonight and I want to have bread with it. I could do that as long as I fed my starter the night before. I could make bread that same day and have it in time for dinner. So that is a nice option. It just depends like what you're looking for. Okay, somebody asked, if you want to bake the same day, how do you ensure that you don't overproof considering it already went through bulk fermentation on the counter as you allow it to grow a bit more after shaping? So yeah, that's the one thing with the same day recipe is you have to, and probably why I like the other one a little bit, the overnight option a little bit more, is because I don't have to like babysit it as much, you know what I mean? Because when it's in the fridge, I just don't worry about it. Whereas on the counter, I want to like keep an eye on it to make sure it's not starting to go over. So the poke test is really like what you'll want to do. So if you're seeing like it's growing a lot in a short period of time, it's probably going to proof a lot quicker. So you can do the poke test, see if it's ready. If it's not ready, okay, just give it a little bit longer. I feel like the more you do it, the better sense you get for it. And once you kind of see in your kitchen, like at a certain temperature, how long is it typically taking, then you have a pretty good idea moving forward. Like it takes about this much time for me for my bread to be ready. I will say, like, I think sometimes people think when you put something in the fridge, it immediately stops fermentation, which isn't accurate. It takes a long time for your food and your dough to actually become the temperature of your fridge. So up until that time that it actually hits the fridge, it can be, rising quite dramatically, depending on like how warm your dough was going in. Because like, let's say your dough was like at 90 degrees, right? When it's sitting out, and then you put it into your fridge, it's going to take a long time for it to get down to the temperature of the fridge. Whereas when it's at like 75, when you put it in the fridge, it might be a little bit quicker. Or if your dough was at like 65 degrees, it's going to reach the temperature of your fridge a lot quicker. So like in all of these cases, each time you're like getting to the same amount of growth at the end, but the amount of the rise during your first proof can change depending on the temperature. So that's why a lot of times you'll see like overnight recipes where you're leaving your dough sit for at cooler temperatures, like at 68. Your dough, you might want it to rise to like 75%, because when it goes into the fridge, it's not going to rise as much as a dough that like out on the counter was like at 80 degrees. That will rise more in the fridge. Does that make sense? So the warmer your dough temperature is on the counter, the less rise you want to do before putting it into the fridge. But you don't have to worry about like trying to figure that out with this recipe. If you stick to like the 75-degree Fahrenheit and about 50% rise, you're good. So you don't have to think about that, but just trying to give you some understanding for like other recipes. Okay, sorry, I feel like a lot of information. Yeah, and somebody is saying, I have noticed that it does proof based on the temperature in the fridge, and that is true as well. Some fridges run warmer than others, and so, you know, your dough might rise more versus like if you have a really cold fridge, your dough might not rise as much. So that can play a role as well. So there's all these little things that can like impact it, and that's why, you know, sourdough, I feel like might feel hard at first, and it's just because it's a learning curve. So if it's just like anything, if you want to be good at something, you have to practice. So it's going to take, you know, some time probably to like really hone in, on sourdough, and it is important to keep practicing. If you want to be good at sourdough, just like anything else, you have to practice at it. But I will say, like, by this point in my life, I feel like I can kind of do anything with sourdough because I have such a good, like, strong foundation with it that, like, I can, you know, troubleshoot easily. Like, that just comes with time and experience. So don't get stressed out or overwhelmed. Just know, like, at the beginning, you know, it's just a little bit of a learning curve. But I do feel like the same day sourdough bread recipe, I lay it out for you pretty well. So if you just follow those instructions and you have a strong starter, I'm setting you up for success. Okay, so that is that on putting it into here. I will just quickly touch on scoring. I didn't make a million loaves of bread to show you each of the steps. Sorry, I do have that all in my online class if that's something that you're interested in. And like I said, I will be updating that class soon. I'm hoping to get that all done in September. But with sourdough scoring, use a bread lawn usually, or you can use a sharp knife if you don't have a bread lawn. But what you do is you want to go about 45 degrees and like a quick 45-degree angle, quick movement, and that is how you can get like an ear in your dough or in your loaf. So an ear is when you have kind of like that flap of skin. I feel like it's hard, not skin, crust, flap of crust. It's hard to show without any examples. Yeah, I will show some examples in my email that I send after. Sorry, sometimes I get very distracted. This is why my online class is great, because I can edit out when I just go into la la land. Yeah, so with scoring, you want to use something sharp, about 45-degree angle. You can do more like intricate designs if you want, like if you want to do like a little wheat stalk or whatever. And with that, you kind of want to go more straight on, and you want to use just light, like barely breaking the skin of the crust. Whereas with your expansion score, where you want it to open up from, you want that one to be a little bit deeper. Okay, somebody's asking about the 5-minute score. So she said, I've seen some bakers mention they bake for 5 minutes, then score. Don't think this is okay. That's totally fine. You can do that. I actually do that if my loaf is overproof. So if I notice when I flip my dough out, like let's say it starts to just like bleh, you know, it doesn't have a ton of structure. What I like to do is I will bake it for a few minutes, because if I score right away, it again even more bleh. That is not the official term, but I can't, my brain's not functioning right now. So when it kind of just expands out like that, Scoring it is really just going to keep spreading it. So in those cases, I will bake it for a few minutes to start getting that crust a little bit harder, and then I will score it, and that kind of like forces it to open up still. So that's just a trick with overproofing. When you have a properly fermented loaf, I don't really think it's necessary to like score later. I guess if you're doing like some kind of fancy design or something, then like maybe, but I don't do anything fancy. I'm like pretty basic over here. So with just a basic, knowing me, I would forget to score it 5 minutes in. So I don't find it necessary unless I've overproofed my dough. Okay, just make sure okay, answer one other question and then I'll keep going. I just began a starter a week ago. How long should I grow it before baking with it? So if you haven't checked out my last live, it's all about making and caring for a sourdough starter. But I'll just quickly answer. You want it to be doubling in size with each feeding. So if it's not doubling in size with each feeding, it's not ready to bake with. Once it's consistently doubling in size with each feeding, at least for a couple days, then go ahead, you're good to go. Okay, just make sure I don't have any other ones. Okay, let's go back to stretch and folds and I will show you how I do that. Well, it's already 12:58. Oh man. Okay, I will quickly show stretch and fold and then I'll leave about 5 minutes for answering any questions that you guys might have. And we'll go from there. Okay, somebody asked if they have to use a Banneton. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but you can just use like an 8 to 10 inch bowl and then line it with like a tea towel, and you could use that instead if you don't have any proofing baskets. Okay, oh my gosh. Sometimes I can't get my gloves on. Okay, here we go. Gonna get my hands a little bit damp. What's nice about my online classes, I have like dough at every step, so you can kind of see that whole process. Whereas like in an Instagram live where I'm only doing an hour, you know, it's a little bit shorter and I just don't have the time right now to do dough at every single stage, but hopefully this gives you a general good understanding. Okay, so we're gonna take our dough here. I'm trying to figure out the best way to show this to you guys. And I'm going to shimmy it up and then bring it on top of itself. Okay, then I'm going to rotate 90 degrees. I'm going to pull it up and bring it on top of itself. Other side. And I don't want to pull it so far that it's like tearing. That's not the goal. We're just bringing it up far enough and then bringing it on top of itself. And we do that 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, all 4 sides. And then I'm going to cover it. That's it. So stretch and folds take very short amount of time. And that's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to let my dough sit for longer. I will just quickly show you if you've ever seen like what's called a coil fold. Kind of does similar thing. But instead of stretching, you go from underneath. My dough is really tight right now, so this isn't a true, it's not going to work super well, but just to give you an idea, you bring your fingers underneath the dough and then you lift up like this, and then you let the sides release. I don't like to do it with my first stretch and fold. As you can see, it's kind of a nightmare right now. This would be more for like the second or third. And then you bring it on top of itself. And then you could do that a couple times. Again, kind of same thing as the stretch and fold. So it's not like you have to do it. I just want to make note of that if you've ever seen that and are like, what the heck? But see how sticky my dough is? Like if I really like put my hand in there, like it's going to stick a ton. That's why you just want to quick movements when you're working with your dough. But I just want you guys to understand that sourdough is sticky. Okay. But as you go further along, it shouldn't be as sticky as it becomes stronger. Okay, any questions on that? Oh, I should have taken my gloves off because I want to show you the window pane test. Okay, I'll put my gloves back on real quick. Okay, you can start asking questions if you have any. Will you cover your dough with a towel or plastic? I don't recommend using a tea towel. I feel like it dries out the top. You could use plastic wrap, aluminum foil. I use my wild clementine covers. What size round container do you recommend for a 2 loaf recipe? I would recommend a 4-quart container. For just a single, I use a 2-quart. Okay. Well, yes, this will be available to rewatch unless something happens at the end of my life and it won't let me save it, but as long as I don't have any issues, this will be saved to my feed afterwards. How many stretch and folds do you normally do? I do 3 sets with roughly about 30 minutes between each set. Okay, so one thing that you want to, this is used to assess like how strong your dough is a window pane test. It's actually doing pretty well already. And it will just keep getting stronger throughout. But you can use this to assess, like, is your dough getting stronger? And with the window pane test, you should be able to see light through without it tearing. It is still tearing a little bit because this dough is not, it's not very strong right now. It's only been through 1 set of stretch and folds, and as it sits for longer, it'll become stronger like that other dough that I showed you that I shaped. But you can use the window pane test to kind of assess, like, how your dough is doing and how strong it is. Okay. I want to make sure I touched on everything that I wanted to. If you don't have a Dutch oven, you can also bake in a loaf pan. I do have instructions on my website on how to bake in a loaf pan that I can link in my email as well. How do you know how long you should keep it in the fridge before baking? If you do like about 8 to 12 hours, you can usually go a little bit longer, like up to 18, or if you have a really cold fridge, you can sometimes get away with longer. But I recommend that 8 to 12 hours. That's pretty good. Pretty reasonable time. And you don't have to do anything to like test if the dough is ready. Just after that timing, you're good to go. You can go ahead and bake it. Which is something that's nice because with the same day option, you do have to like do the poke test and things. Whereas if it's just in the fridge overnight, then there's not as much testing that has to be done. Okay, do I have any advice for open baking in a steel? I have only really open baked bread bowls and sometimes mini loaves. I do have a thick steel. I can link that in the email that I like. But as far as like doing a ton of open baking and sourdough, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it. A lot of those micro bakery influencers they have some tutorials on theirs. A lot of them use lava rocks. I just personally was like, I'm never going to buy lava rocks because I just don't want to have to like buy lava rocks, right? So what I like to do is you want to create steam somehow. Like on my bread bowls, what I do is I get tea towels and I like drench them in water, and then I put a little bit of water in a pan and then put the tea towels in there that are wet, and then I put them on the second rack in the oven, and that's how I do my little bread bowls. But yeah, that's kind of all I got there. You do want to like create steam and be able to keep the steam in, and that helps to keep your crust soft so it can fully rise. And then you can get rid of the steam and let it just like once it's fully risen, and then you can just like brown up that crust. So that's why I have used the tea towels with water. Do you do? Yeah, Lydia's asking about the second rise. How long for your second rise? I will save this live and then you can go back and rewatch that part because I kind of already talked about that. But there's 2 options. You can either do it on the counter, which is usually about 1 to 3 hours, or in the fridge, which is about 8 to 12 hours. Okay, see one more question here. When you mix your dough, do you mix salt together also, or wait an hour and then do salt? I don't wait. I just mix it all together. I have tested it both ways. And for, I wouldn't say my recipe is like extremely low hydration, but it is a more beginner lower hydration recipe. It's just not necessary to wait to add the salt. In my opinion, I don't think it makes that big of a difference. And if I wait to add my salt, I would forget about it and never add it in, and then my bread would taste disgusting. So I have always just added my salt in, at least for the last few years, and it's never been an issue. If you start working with like some whole grains or like really higher hydration doughs, sometimes it can be beneficial to wait and add your salt a little bit later. But as far as this recipe goes, it's not necessary. Okay, somebody said, my friend said to throw ice into the pan before baking. If you're talking about like in your Dutch oven, there's like a lot of tricks that people say. Honestly, it comes down to if your loaf is properly fermented, it is going to rise well and it's going to bake well. And if it is not properly fermented, it is not. So if you think the ice is working well and does something special for your loaf, like, go ahead and do it. I don't find any of those tricks necessary, because if my loaf is properly fermented, it's going to come out beautifully, nice and brown and delicious. So I don't find those things necessary, but if you want to do it, you can, or if you think it's helpful. Somebody asked, do my towels not burn when I'm baking? No, they don't. I make sure they are very wet. But again, I've only done it for the bread bowls, so those bake in about 30 minutes. So, okay. I'll end here. Do you have a recipe for gluten-free starter? I don't have a recipe for gluten-free. I am not gluten-free. I have tried to make a gluten-free sourdough starter before. It did not go well. But also, to be fair, I am one of those people that just like goes for something, and I don't do a ton of research before I start something. I just decide to just try it. So for me, that did not go well, and probably because I did not put as much effort as I needed to into like researching what I needed to do with gluten-free. A couple of celiacs and Snow White Bakes GF are their Instagram handles. Both of them do talk about making a gluten-free sourdough starter. So I would recommend them. I am not going to be your go-to for talking gluten-free, unfortunately. Okay, someone mentioned their friends add hot water to a pie pan and puts that on the bottom rack. Again, all of these are kind of similar things. It's just about creating steam so that you keep your crust soft long enough for it to fully rise if you're open baking. Okay, good tips on shaping. This seems to be the most challenging thing for me. Oh, I was going to do one more thing with the shaping. So that reminded me. Oh, and one other thing. Oh my gosh, it's already 1:10. Okay, I'm going to keep this short because I don't want you guys to have to be around here forever. If you are adding mix-ins to your dough, you can do that usually during the first set of stretch and folds, or you can add it in shaping. I personally prefer to do it. There's bread dough everywhere. I personally prefer to do that in my stretch and folds, so I feel like it incorporates and mixes better. So that's just one thing there. Okay, back to shaping. Using damp hands and trying to get it as taut as possible. Those are probably my top tips for shaping. I do have a YouTube video where I show shaping a round and oval loaf, and I can link that in the email as well. And then also, I'm not sure if you were here earlier when I did that part where I shaped the loaf, but you can always go back and watch that later as well. Okay, let me show you stitching real quick. Okay, so stitching is just one more thing that you can do to really make sure that you have a nice taut surface. So to stitch, you want to make sure you're working on relaxed dough, and then you just pull the sides and... Oh, I had put rice flour down over here when I was showing you the poke test, so it doesn't want to stick over there. So we're just bringing it together like so, and that just helps create a taut skin on the outside, which results in a nice crispy crust and easier scoring. So it's not essential, but something I like to do to wrap up my loaf at the end. So you can do stitching. You just have to do it on relaxed dough. Don't do it right after you shape your dough. It will not stay. Okay. All right, let's see. Will you post your recipe? Yes, I have my recipe on my blog. It's countryroadsourdough.com. You can just search same day sourdough bread, or if you're on my email list, I will send out the link there as well. But you can find the full recipe. I have sample schedules in there, instructions, photos, all of that. And let's see. And somebody asked, does it make a difference if you warm up the water for your sourdough at 75 or 80 degrees instead of just regular room temperature water? I mean, yeah, it does make a difference, because the warmer your water is, the warmer your dough is going to be. And if your dough is warmer, it's going to ferment quicker. So if like your house temperature is above 75 degrees, you might want to use a little bit of cooler water to get the same timing. Or if your house is really cold, you'll probably want to use warmer water to kind of like balance that out as well. I honestly never take the temperature of my water, just because, I don't know, just seems like an extra step. I just make sure my dough's at 75 degrees and just use lukewarm water, I suppose. Okay, and what's the difference between the oval baskets versus the round? It's just different shapes depending on like what you prefer for making bread. It's not going to impact the like flavor or like any of that stuff. It's just a matter of like what you prefer when like, I feel like this is better if you're wanting to make like sandwiches out of it versus like the round loaf. But they both work fine. Okay, I think I'm going to end there because I'm already at an hour and 15. I don't want to make this too long. But thank you all for joining me, and make sure you're on my email list to get this recap email. And if you're watching this later and you're like, oh shoot, I missed the email, I am putting like an automation together. So like if you sign up for my email list later, for the sourdough era email, you will get those past emails sent to you. So just a side note there. But anyways, okay, have a great day. Thanks for joining in. We'll see ya.